Hi, my name's Deanna with Dakota STEAM Learning, and today I'm going to take you through our science activity um, procedures basically so that you can see and you know kind of what to expect if you are using one of our science activities. So before I get too far into that, I want to make sure that you are aware of the difference between what we call a science activity and what is a science experiment. So science activities are not science experiments because we're not going through the scientific method. We are not conducting an experiment that has control variables and independent and dependent variables. Instead, science activities honestly are just fun. Like they're a way for students to engage in the guided activity that's going to allow them to experience a scientific principle. So, even though we're not going through a full-on experiment, so these are basically science activities that show something that can help them better understand science, but they're not going through the scientific method. So they're not as rigid, right? There's no hypothesizing, there's none of that. That being said, because our viewpoint is STEAM learning, we are really, really into everything that we do focuses on building students' critical thinking skills, their communication skills, and then their collaboration and creativity skills. Obviously, with science, we're less with the collaboration and less with the creativity because number one, creativity doesn't really work in science because we need to find data that supports outcomes, right? So this isn't like art or engineering where you're coming up with something that's truly creative. Instead, this is really focused on communication and critical thinking. So, when we are doing a science activity or leading students through a science activity, all of our lessons start with obviously just telling them the expectations for the day or what they're going to be doing. And then we lead them through different steps that focus on those key competencies in different ways. So they're all integrated into everything that we do while they do this science activity, which is why we are really, really passionate about it because it's a way for helping students build those competencies without them even realizing that that's what you're doing. So, step number one is inspire, and that's where students get to see their scientific inspiration for the project. So, this is where we include a video or a picture that illustrates the scientific principle that they're going to be exploring inside of this activity. So, obviously, it's not going to show the activity that they're actually doing. Instead, it's going to break it down like if they're doing stuff that's about density, it's going to show them a picture of density, even though that's not exactly what they're going to, the exact activity they're going to be doing. After that, we hit them with some science history. And so a lot of our stuff is linked to different regions, or it's linked to books, or it's linked to very specific aspects of this. So, not always, but a lot of times there'll be some sort of science history that we want to review with students. Like, why is this relevant whatsoever? And so, like, for example, if we're doing a science activity where we are studying rocks and minerals, but it's part of our bigger Spanish and STEAM collaboration instead of stuff, then this is where we'd talk about why rocks and minerals are really relevant to that. Does that make sense? So that's exactly where it is. So after they are told about the scientific principle, this is where your students would then remember every student gets a STEAM journal. And in their STEAM journal, if you want to use it, this is where they would write down the scientific principle that they are exploring. We always have two versions of our STEAM journal, a filled in version and then a not filled in version, so that you can decide if you want to have kids fill it out or you already want to have it filled out for them. And that's because you know your kids best and you know what your goals at this moment are with your students. So sometimes you might have them do the blank version, other times you might have them do the filled in version. It's really up to you. So after we're done just kind of introducing what the scientific principle that's inspiring us today is, then we move on to step number 2, which we call activate. And that's where we're going to ask students to use their background knowledge to start making connections. Like I said, we're all about critical thinking and we're all about communication. So this is a perfect example of why we structure things the way that we do so that we can get those skills in here. So we activate schema. If you've ever done a lesson with Dakota STEAM Learning, you know that every single type of lesson we have has activating schema because it's a great way to pose questions to students to get them thinking about relevant information. It's a great way to initiate discussion. And most importantly, it's a great way for them to start thinking critically already very, very early into this process. So we'll pose like 2 to 4 questions on a sheet that looks like this, on a slide that looks like this. And then you would lead students through a discussion using your typical protocols for discussion. So think, pair, share, whatever it is that you use. You can end in a whole group discussion. And this is just a really great way for kids to not only communicate some more in this project, but also for them to think critically. And then in their STEAM journal, they can record. So it really depends on your students. So I'll be honest, different years I've done this different ways. Sometimes I have them record before they share, and sometimes I have them share and then record. So it really depends on the feel of your class. Like I had a lot of very, very shy students. So I had them write first because then they weren't so intimidated and they had something to fall back on before they shared. Then I had a super outgoing class and they didn't need that, but they really needed to be held accountable for what other people said. So I had them share. And then when they wrote things down, they had to write down at least one thing that their partner said. So make this work for you. That's why we design the things that we do with that semi-open-endedness, because we're teachers and we know that you need to make it work for your class and their needs at this exact moment in time. So, step number 3 is connect. And that's where we identify the STEAM elements that impact the science activity. So, obviously, we're always going to hit hard on science during this. It's kind of like your research section of a scientific method, but we don't only hit science because our biggest thing with STEAM is we want kids to understand the integration of these things and how they impact each other and how critical thinking and creativity underlie all of it, right? So we always start with science, and then a lot of times, way more often than you would imagine in these science activities, there's still math and technology. Every once in a while, you even get an engineering aspect, but they're always underlying, and we point out the critical thinking. We point out if there is creativity. That one we see a lot less in these, but it's really important for kids to have that very explicitly pointed out to them so that they can start to find those connections and those patterns within everything that they're doing. Then, after we do that, we have them connect in their STEAM journal. Same thing as before. You could have them predict before and then have them come back and rewrite. It's really what your goals are with your students. You can make this page work for you. So after that, we get to the create part. That's where we're going to follow the process to create a project that illustrates our scientific principle. So you'll notice it's not a procedure like in a science experiment. This is just a process. So we identify the materials for students. This list is pretty specific typically, but remember there's always a super detailed list for teachers in our resources. So you don't have to rely on this slide to get you through. It will also have that material list that comes with all of your lesson resources. So that one's really designed for students. Same thing. So then what's going to happen is we're going to get them to start to journal again. And the reason we're going to have them journal again is because a lot of times these activities go fast and you have kids that move at very different rates. So it's up to you. As always, we always say teachers knows best, right? So sometimes, and this is how we do it in our own classes with students as well, sometimes we have them follow along with us and do the step with it. And sometimes we preview all the steps and we have students write them down and then have them do it independently. Really depends on the age. Kindergarten, probably not. Fifth grade can definitely do things independently. And between those 2 grades, it just depends on the activity. So so once again, kind of that open-endedness with you could either have them follow along with you and write down the step as they do it, or you could have them write down all the steps and then come back and do it on their own. So each step is going to have a detailed description for that step, and pictures are always given. when they're helpful. So sometimes it's a general picture and sometimes it's of us doing it inside of a classroom. It'll really, really depend on the step and how detailed it is, and if our descriptions and words we think is sufficient. So you'll just go through each step, like I said, either having students do it while you go over it, or breaking it down and then having them do it after. But sometimes there's 3 steps, sometimes there's a lot, but we'll go through each one. And then when the activity is over, that's when we move on to step number 5, which is evaluate. And I feel like I'm up on a pedestal now about critical thinking and communication, but that's exactly what we're going to return to. So, this is where we're going to review the project and make final connections to our scientific principle. So, once again, we're going to hit hard on those higher order thinking with evaluating. So, the students are going to reflect on anything they learned new about this scientific principle from creating this project. And then we ask them to break down the scientific principle in one sentence, which we know is really difficult for students. This could obviously be one that you guided, especially early in the year, and modeled it for them. And then we always include this slide just in case a student missed it or you missed it. What exactly did you see? So we include key information to ensure each student understands what they were experiencing with the activity. We never want that to be like, well, that activity was cool, but I don't know why it worked. We want to make sure that the science is on point by the end of this activity, right? And so students will finish up that journal page, and then we're actually done. That's the end of it for this one. This is much faster than our other lessons. It's faster than a science experiment 99% of the time. It's faster than art or engineering usually is as well. So that is the end of our procedures when we are going through science activities. We're always so excited when you guys choose to use one of our resources because we love them. And it's so exciting to know that students beyond our own classrooms are still getting to experience them. So thanks, friends. And I hope that your students love our science activities as much as ours do.